All right. If you saw the thumbnail, it'll be probably self-explanatory. Today's chat is going to be about the overhead squat. I did my judge's certificate for the 2026 CrossFit Open, completed it yesterday. I would say if you haven't signed up for the Open yet, go sign up. If you'd like to learn more about movement standards and movement requirements for the Open, you might as well sign up to do the judges course too, even if it's not a requirement. It is a good deal of learning because still years on, I learn something new every year. And this year was no exception. Prior to that, I thought just okay, camera straps in the chat. Bam, I am live. I haven't been telling anyone about these lives, and so unless you've got your notifications turned on or notifications on for my channel, you probably won't get notified about these lives either. Where was I going with that? I thought I might start with some of the questions that have been commented on the past lives before I jump into what I'm talking about today. So that's one thing I wasn't organized about. So just bear with me 1 second while I open that up. Spend my life switching between accounts from the camera live to my own account. So backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Still haven't worked out how to get to the comments section simply though. My to your channel. Share this tab instead. Where is it? There. Okay. All right. So, like I said, I still haven't learned how to do this properly. Past comments. I'm in the wrong thing still. Anyway, if you are not subscribing, hit subscribe. That'll give you notifications for when I go live. You can put notifications all on and that will happen. Normally, if you come to my page, this won't be here. It'll just be these two really old videos of Eliza and I doing the Torium Pro online qualifiers from years past. However, there's this tab here. That's the live tab. That'll take you to past lives that I've done, and if any upcoming are scheduled there. Now, what I was doing is somehow finding my studio. Why is this so hard to do? Maybe Justin will come in and help me if I can't find it. Oh, there it is. YouTube studio. Comments, comments, comments. Sort by newest. That's weird. Ah, unresponded. Okay. We got there. I got there eventually. Hello, Jimbo. Thanks for tuning in and watching me struggle through technology for the last however long you've been on here for. I think I'm up to scratch. Anyway, just going through some of the old comments. Old, they're not that old. We'll work from front to back. I think I addressed these in one of the other lives. Jim, just in the comments there. Eilish, I know I answered that question on the following live that I did. Where are we? Dane left a question. Is there a parallel that can be drawn from RX/scale to an RPE number, rate of perceived exertion? Noting some days external factors require you to scale back. I respond to Dane yesterday. I hadn't seen that question until yesterday. I'm going to follow that up in more detail, but in a future live. But I wrote back and just said a good one for deeper discussion, which is why I'll do it in a future live. Outside of that, you could say yes, but it really does depend. As you say, external factors can play a part in the answer being no also. So it really does depend, which is why it's probably a bit more of a deeper discussion for a future episode. I also had Nikita ask a question on the live that was, what is intended stimulus and why is it important? Responded to this one as well, but just so you in case you can't see and you can only hear, Love the discussion on intensity and how you brought in how much load lifted between the two examples. Makes so much sense. So that's when I was talking about, can't remember if it was dumbbell snatches or dumbbell push press, but just because lightening the load might seem not at, how did I describe this? Just because the workout weight or the RX weight is prescribed load doesn't mean it's appropriate for you. And at the end of the workout, you might benefit from more load shifted, so more work completed with a lighter load weight than what you would have if you'd struggled through and paused and rested a lot with a heavier load that stopped you from consistently moving through that movement. So that was what that comment was about there. Do you think the benefit of considering intended stimulus is that it allows for virtuosity in movement and therefore reducing injury risk whilst getting more gains? So for those that might not understand virtuosity in movement, that's just chasing perfection in movement. So trying to be as perfect as possible with the movement that you do, and therefore by doing that, reducing the risk of injury while getting more gains. So the question, do you think the benefit of considering intended stimulus is that it allows for virtuosity in the movement and therefore reducing injury risk while getting more gains? And the response there, I took a little bit of time to think this one through and write it out for Nikita. And I figure it might as well be worth saying it out loud here too. I would say it allows, gosh, it's so hard to highlight things, isn't it? Guess I don't need to highlight it if I'm reading it out. It allows and or prioritizes virtuosity in movement. So with that, yes, I think Nikita's hit the nail on the head. I think the ability to reach the intended intensity is what elicits the fitness gains. And so scaling to the stimulus or preserving good movement technique allows you to train consistently for as long as possible without injury. And at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? You want to be training for 70 years of your life. And if you constantly are trying to push for more than your body can handle without risking injury, that can significantly decrease your ability to train consistently over long periods of time without having some time off for injury rehab and recovery. So absolutely yes to reduce the risk of injury while still consistently achieving gains. Coach Greg Glassman has been quoted to say, give me A+ intensity with A- movement. And so with that in mind, my thought process there is there will be an element of not perfect movement, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be chasing perfect movement when chasing intensity, which is where the virtuosity can be lost momentarily. But the goal is to work as close to that max intensity as you can while maintaining as good of movement as you can. So A+ movement with A+ intensity. Give me A+ intensity with A- movement standards. So there'll be a little bit of a loss in perfect movement, which is why it's not A+, but the A+ there that you're giving is the intensity level. A- movement being, I still want it to be pretty good, but it doesn't need to be perfect in that moment. The goal is to do so where it's not to an extent that it can risk injury. So if you start giving me B-grade movement or C-grade movement, we are moving closer towards your body and your muscles can't handle that, and we could be risking injury if the intensity with that load or skill or whatever it might be stays high. So that's why good CrossFit coaches care more about how you're moving your body or the weight, not how heavy the weight is or whether you're doing movements RX. So I think that's a really important one to remember. It's like, hey, when you come into a CrossFit gym, you might see RX on the board and you might think that's what you should be doing. But it's not at all what, gosh, what's going on here? It's not at all what the coaches are actually looking for. We're looking for you to move as well as possible to the standard that you can move. Couple more people in the chat. Hello, if you're still there. Matt, 3 hands up. And Yoni, I'm here. You can start now. Thanks, Tony. I'll start. So I was going to talk about the overhead squats today. That's why the thumbnail is the way it is, if you saw that. And today's title being I'm Still Learning Years Later. I did the late as always, Yoni. I did the CrossFit Judges course. I finished that yesterday, and once again, another year in, and I've learned something new, which I ended up down a massive rabbit hole yesterday and probably spent another hour doing continued learning, I guess you could call it. So I spent my time researching the overhead squat to understand whether or not I was going crazy or whether I just missed this one little piece for the last 12, 13, 14 years of doing CrossFit and judging people in the open. All right, so that being said, you'll know I've made it if this video gets pulled down because CrossFit said I'm not allowed to show it. I screen recorded the video from the judges course yesterday. The video is, and if you can't see it, I'll explain it. Which of the following, so there were 4 options here. I didn't want to get in too much trouble, so I cut them out from the bottom, but essentially it is multiple choice question in the judges course based off watching videos and reviewing movement or reading something and understanding from there. So multiple choice, press play on this video. All right, so this lady here, Jenny Orr, she's doing overhead squats as part of this. For most people, they'll probably look at that and think that's a good-looking overhead squat because the thing that we handle all the time is squat depth. Hips lower than the knees in the bottom. I'll just press play again. Just 5 or 6 reps, and every single time when she goes down and back up, it is an empty bar. Her elbows are bent. So I think that's probably worth noting too. It is much easier to do an overhead squat with your elbows bent when the load is light. The question was, where did I put it? Well, the options were, are these good reps? The athlete maintains the same overhead position throughout the movement. Well, they do, that's true. No rep, the athlete has bent arms at the top of the squat. Good rep, the athlete reaches a depth below parallel and finishes at full hip and knee extension. That's true. The athlete reaches depth and finishes at full hip and knee extension. Or no rep, the athlete does not squat below parallel. We can see clearly if you're watching, you can see that athlete squatting below parallel. Anyway, this one got me because I was like, I would have given that as a rep. If someone at the gym was doing that and they had poor overhead press out or lockout, we would still credit them the way we talk about standards for the overhead squat being hip crease below the knee and then standing back up to extension. So one of those answers specifically said, good rep, the athlete reaches a depth below parallel and finishes at full hip and knee extension. So in my mind, that was the right answer. It turns out it was not. And the correct answer was, it's a no rep because the athlete has bent arms at the top of the squat. So if you're out there doing the judges course and you're not sure, there's your answer to that one. Hopefully CrossFit don't take my certification away from me for saying that. So this is the rabbit hole I ended up going down. I started with, let me just find it. Share this tab instead. So the level 1 training guide, this is available out there on the internet for anyone to read, to go through, to review. I think it was a page 178. Nope. So the overhead squat. So I ended up reviewing the overhead squat because I was like, surely I haven't been getting this wrong this whole time. The points of performance, common faults and corrections carrying over from the air squat. The new element is the overhead squat is a load added in the overhead position. So set up position, shoulder width stance, shoulders push up in the bar, arms extended, wide grips on the bar, wide enough to perform a pass through. So if you had a broomstick, you'd be able to bring your arms behind you and come back, and armpits face forward. From here, execution, hips descend back and down, knees in line with toes, lumbar curve is maintained. Hips descend lower than the knees, so hips lower than the knees in the bottom of that squat. Heels stay down, bar moves over the middle of the foot, and then finish, complete at full hip and knee extension. So in the level 1 training guide, there isn't a mention about arms extended at the top of the overhead squat. As you go on through the level 1 training guide, it talks about faults and the ways to correct that. So the first fault here is inactive overhead position due to flexed elbows or inactive shoulders. So you can see in the picture on the top left, the elbows are bent on James Hobart there. And then the correction comes beside. Cue athletes to press the bar up. And so that takes their elbow from that bent position to that locked out position. So I was doing the judges course going, I didn't realize your arms have to be extended. Then I came across to the training guide and I was like, okay, the overhead squat movement standard just says complete at full hip and knee extension. It does reference arms extended at the start, but it doesn't reference coming back to that arms extended position if it disappears. So I was like, is it a movement standard or is it just a fault that should be corrected? Because when we teach the overhead squat, we want you to press up through the bar. If you can't press up and lock out through that barbell, then you're going to be heavily limited on the load you can lift over time as well, because it is going to be reliant on whether or not your arms can take that load, more so than your body being able to support that load through a locked out position. So I'm reading all of this stuff going, when did this change? When did arms extended become part of the movement standard, or have I just always missed that in the past? And so I continued to explore. I went on to YouTube and I watched the video on squats on YouTube. And I was like, all right, let's see if they reference anything here. Some demo of the movement from the side position. You can tell his elbows are extended, but again, at no point, again, you can see his elbows are extended, but at no point in here did it say anything about arms being extended. So shoulder width stance, wide grip on the bar, shoulders pushed up into the bar, armpits face forward, hips descend back and down, hips descend lower than the knees, lumbar curve is maintained, heels down, bar moves over the middle of the foot, and knees are in line with toes. Complete at full hip and knee extension. So once again, that sentence there where it doesn't actually reference the arms, because I guess 11 years ago, there wasn't a lot of people in online video reviews, video submissions with bent elbows in the overhead squat. So I'm still feeling like I'm taking crazy pills going, when did they change this and how come they didn't tell anyone about it? And so we go a little further. All right, well, this is a judge's course. How about maybe it's got to do with more recent movement standards in more recent competitions? So then I end up searching for the quarterfinals workout from 2022. This is workout 4, the other total, 1 clean, 1 bench press, 1 overhead squat. And in here, under the overhead squat section, it specifically references, where did I see it? So it talks about the overhead squat and what's expected when it comes to being standards for the quarterfinals workout. Standard stuff that you would see through the Open each year with dot points as to what the expectation is. But then as you move on to sort of towards the back end of it, the barbell must remain overhead until the lockout position is achieved. Now, it doesn't specifically say yet what that lockout is, just the expectation is that the athlete's standing at extension. The rep is credited when the athlete's hips, knees, and arms are fully extended and the bar is directly over or slightly behind the middle of the body. So that little bit of research brought me to this point. Arms must be extended, elbows must be extended. That was 2022. And I thought, okay, when was the time before that when we had the overhead squat? Let's see how old this really is. We go back in time. Now we're at 2015, workout 15.2. So 2015, week 2. Every 3 minutes for as long as possible. 2 rounds of 10 overhead squats, 10 chest to bar pull-ups. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Wonder if they'll repeat that this year. So overhead squats are in this workout as well. Now we've jumped back to 2015. So we were 2022 before, and now we've gone back in time to 2015. The overhead squat. The hip crease must be below the top of the knee at the bottom. A full squat snatch is permitted, but not required to start the movement if standard depth is achieved. The barbell must come to full lockout overhead with the hips, knees, and arms fully extended. I've never paid attention to the arms fully extended sentence in that before, so here we are. and the bar directly over the middle of the body. You may not use the rack. So 2015, arms fully extended was referenced. And again, it's something that we tell people to do, but it's not something that I've ever thought was the reason for receiving a no rep in an open workout. If the person's elbows were bent, as long as their hips went below their knees and they stood up to a full extension, I would have given them that rep because that was the standard that I was working off. And I would have probably encouraged them to press up through that bar more to lock their arms out. Because at the end of the day, if you lock your arms out, you're going to be able to hang on to that weight for longer or support that load for longer. It's just interesting that even in 2015, that was listed as part of the standard. The barbell must complete to full lockout overhead with the hips, knees, and arms fully extended. And I thought, I wonder if there's been anything prior to 2015 with the overhead squat. So then I ended up in 2011 and have a look at the scorecard from 2011. Crazy stuff. So this was the first official CrossFit Open that was done online worldwide. Prior to this, to qualify for the CrossFit Games, you just signed up like any regular competition. Whoops, sorry, I didn't share my tab. Try that again. Have a look at that scorecard from 2011. Very simple compared to what they are now. It's 2 pages. First page is just really short, quick movement standards and expectations. Second page is the scorecard. If I just jump back quickly to 2015, I'll share that again. This scorecard is 9 pages long, but those 9 pages, the first 2 are movement standards, and the following one is category standards, and then after that, it's all the different scorecards. And then if we go to share this tab, the quarterfinals from 2022, things get crazier then. So scorecards on the final page there, but there are 7 pages of movement standards and setups and expectations for that particular workout. So things have changed significantly over the last 10 to 15 years. So 2011, week 4. So week 4 of the CrossFit Open in 2011 was bar facing burpees and overhead squats and ring muscle ups. The overhead squats here says this is a standard overhead squat. That's how simple it was. Once upon a time, you could just say this is a standard overhead squat and everyone knew what the expectation was. A full squat snatch is permitted but not required to start the movement if the standard depth is achieved. Again, that same sentence from before. The hip crease must be below the knee at the bottom of the squat, and the hips and knees must fully open at the top with the barbell locked out overhead. Now, it says there, it doesn't specifically say the arms locked out, but when you talk about the barbell being locked out overhead, the expectation would be that it is the arms that's doing that. So somewhere between 2011 and 2015, the specific word of arms fully extended came into play, and then further into 2022, it's still getting used in that capacity. Of course, this is the rabbit hole I went down. And so with that, I ended up with a journal article as well, or I ended up with a summarized version of the journal article. But for the sake of this today, because again, this is continued learning for me. This does help me be a better coach, understand movement standards better. I'm going to read this journal article out and just talk through it. It's mostly pictures. What are we? 7 pages long, but 5 of those pages are mostly visual representation. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So Greg Glassman used to write journal articles since as early as 2002. What are we, 2026 now? So for the last 24 years, well, not for the last 5 years, but for at least 20 years, Greg Glassman and others were writing journal articles, but it started with Greg by himself. This particular one, the overhead squat, written by Greg, was issued in the CrossFit Journal in August 2005. So this information is over 20 years old, but it's been in the CrossFit Journal articles since 2005. The overhead squat. The overhead squat is the ultimate core exercise, the heart of the snatch, and peerless in developing effective athletic movement. This functional gem trains for efficient transfer of energy from large to small body parts, the essence of sport movement. For this reason, it is an indispensable tool for developing speed and power. The overhead squat also demands and develops functional flexibility, and similarly develops the squat by amplifying and cruelly punishing faults in squat posture, movement, and stability. So quite often, if you're new to CrossFit and we have squat snatches or overhead squats, which it will be brought back to learn that movement, many people say how hard the overhead squat is as a movement and how challenging it can be because of what is required to do that movement. Now, the overhead squat is to midline control, stability, and balance what the clean and snatch are to power, unsurpassed. So if your overhead squat gets better, you're going to see improvements in many other movements within the CrossFit space, in particular for midline control, stability, and balance. The same way that getting better at the clean and the snatch, you'll see improvements in overall power output elsewhere through CrossFit. Ironically, the overhead squat is exceedingly simple, yet universally nettlesome for beginners. Challenging. There are 3 common obstacles to learning the overhead squat. The first is the scarcity of skilled instruction. So you got to remember it's 2005 when this is written too. So CrossFit hasn't even really extended outside of one small gym in America. The first is the scarcity of skilled instruction. Outside of the Olympic lifting community, most instruction on the overhead squat is laughably, horribly wrong, dead wrong. The second is a weak squat. You need to have a rock solid air squat to learn the overhead squat. We strongly recommend you review the December 2002 issue of the CrossFit Journal on squatting before attempting the overhead squat. So you've got to build your foundations first, build that base before you can even take that weight overhead. If you can't squat full range of motion without any external load, you're going to have a very tricky time being able to perform the movement with an external load. You could save yourself a lot of time in the long run. So imagine it's 2005, and if you haven't read the squatting article yet, or you're new to CrossFit and you're reading the overhead squat journal article, they're saying go back in time and just read the air squat article. The third obstacle is starting with too much weight. You haven't a snowball's chance in hell of learning the overhead squat with a bar. And that's an empty bar to start with. You'll need to use a length of dowel or PVC pipe. Use anything over 5 pounds to learn this move, and your overhead squat will be stubborn. And then the article goes on to how to teach the overhead squat. 7-step process for learning. And so you got to remember again, it's 2005. There aren't gyms out there. There aren't really coaches out there outside of the weightlifting space. So people have found CrossFit online. They've been putting out workouts online on .com daily since February 2002. So by this point, 3-ish years on, how's my math? 3 years later, there's more people doing CrossFit using the website daily for the workout, and overhead squats come up, and maybe they're the comments that keep coming up. I can't do this movement. I can't do this movement. Or maybe the squat snatch is coming up and they're saying, I don't understand how to do a squat snatch because I can't get down in the bottom of the squat with the barbell overhead, but I have no worries doing a power snatch, which is just jumping that weight up and overhead to that full extended position. So this journal article moves into teaching the overhead squat in 7 steps. There's a few pictures there if you can see. Start only when you have a strong squat. Again, foundations first. And use a dowel or PVC pipe, not a weight. You should be able to maintain a rock bottom squat with your back arch, so chest up, nice and proud, head and eyes forward, and body weight predominantly on your heels for several minutes as a prerequisite to the overhead squat. So there's one for you, squat challenge. Hands up in the chat. or in the comments later if you're someone who can do not an overhead squat, sorry, a squat hold in an total bottom position for more than 5 minutes. Even a 15-pound training bar, so that's about an 8-kilo training bar, is way too heavy to learn the overhead squat. Step 2. Learn locked arm dislocates or pass-throughs with a dowel. So that's the broomstick that we use at the gym, and you rotate with that broomstick up and overhead, touch your back behind, and come back to the front. You want to be able to move the dowel nearly 360 degrees, starting with the dowel down at the arm's length in front of the body, and then move it in a wide arc until it comes to rest down and behind you without so much as slightly bending your arms at any point. So full locked out position of those arms. Start with grip wide enough to easily pass through, and then repeatedly bring the hands in closer until passing through presents a moderate stretch of the shoulders. This is your training grip. Be able to perform, step 3, be able to perform the pass through at the top, the bottom, and everywhere in between while descending into the squat. So not only at a standing position, but you should be able to do a partial squat and perform that broomstick pass through, and you should be able to hold a bottom squat and be able to perform that broomstick pass through. You can imagine if you're catching in the bottom of a squat snatch and you need to be able to dump the bar behind you. If your hands are too narrow, that becomes a really challenging position. If your hands are in that appropriate pass through position, you can safely jump forward and dump behind when that happens. At the bottom of each squat, slowly bring the dowel back and forth, moving from the front to the back. So challenge you next time, grab a broomstick and see if you can hold a squat in the bottom and rotate that broomstick from the front of your body to the back side of your body and forward again without losing that squat position. Step 4, learn to find the frontal plane. Those darn overhead squats are quite nettlesome indeed. Yes, Justin, that is true. And I think that if you can't perform an overhead squat, some people can learn it faster, but for other people, particularly if you've got ankle or knee flexion issues, or you sit a lot and you haven't got a lot of hip mobility, it can take 2 years, and or shoulder mobility. It can take up to 2 years to be able to comfortably overhead squat with just an empty bar as well. So yes, nettlesome indeed. So we're at step 4, learn to find the frontal plane with the dowel for every position. Sorry, did I just read that one out? No. Learn to find the frontal plane with the dowel from every position in the squat. Practice this with your eyes closed. You want to develop a keen sense of where the frontal plane is located. This is the same drill as step 3, but this time you're bringing the dowel to a stop in the frontal plane and holding briefly with each pass through. Having a training partner check to see if at each stop the dowel is in the frontal plane. So what that means, up and overhead, not fully pulled back behind, not hanging out in front, but in that nice stacked position. Step 5, start the overhead squat by standing tall, straight and tall, with the broomstick held as high as possible in the frontal plane. You want to start with the dowel directly overhead, not behind you, or even worse yet, even a little bit in front of you. So directly overhead is where we want to position that. The overhead squat continued, step 6. Very slowly lower to the bottom of a squat, keeping the dowel in the frontal plane the entire time. Have a training partner watch from your side, or a coach, to make sure that the dowel does not move forward or backward as you squat to the bottom. Moving slightly behind the frontal plane is okay, but forward is dead wrong. And you can imagine that. I'll just make myself bigger slightly for a moment. If I turn side on and I'm overhead and I'm going down, if the bar shifts forward of me, that load that was 10, 15, 20 kilos overhead becomes significantly heavier when it's out in front of that body. It can be controlled a little bit more if it's back behind the body, but there'll still be a point where that 10, 15, 20 kilo bar feels heavier than it actually is because the weight is shifted behind, or worse, in front, which is why press up through and keep it overhead. Move slightly behind the front. Said that. If you cannot keep the dowel from coming forward, your grip may be too narrow. The dowel will not stay in the frontal plane automatically. You have to pull it back very deliberately as you descend. Now, this isn't an aggressive pull, but it is, as I said, push up and pull back slightly to keep it in place there. Step 7, practice the overhead squat regularly and increase load in tiny increments. We can put a 2.5 pound plate, 1 kilo fractional, on the dowel, and then a 5 pound, so 2.5 kilos, and then a 5 with a 2.5, so 3.5 to 4 kilos, and continue advancing up from there. Next, use a 15 pound training bar. So if you're at Dauntless, you can use the 8 kilo bar or the 10 kilo bar, but only while maintaining perfect form. So that's that virtuosity we were talking about at the start. There is no benefit to adding weight if the dowel and later the bar cannot be kept in the frontal plane. And then there's an image, if you like sciencey stuff a bit more, with angles and more description. And probably before I move on, again, I'll say it's 2005. This is the best way to describe how to do an overhead squat for people. It's a lot more common now to have access to, say, a box or a ball to be able to sit down on to feel that position. Quite regularly with new people at the gym, it is to give them a feel for the movement starting from the bottom up. We'll sit them on, say, a 12-inch box with a training bar racked on their shoulders. We'll get them to press it up in that seated position and then stand up with it to see how it feels. So they will use the broomstick and they will progress through the overhead squat with the broomstick, and they will use broomstick with light fractionals on it to get a feel for it too. But there is also that opportunity to teach the body from the bottom up position what that load feels like to stand up with, so that their body is starting to get a feel for that too. From there, with that training bar, until they're strong enough with it, the descending portion is still quite challenging for them. More benefit, obviously, in negative, so going from the top down or the challenging part, than there is from coming up. But we play around with lots of different options so that the mind muscle can start to apply those connections, because sometimes people have some strength and some muscle that would allow them to perform that overhead squat, but they don't have that mind muscle connection yet. So giving them the opportunity to use the broomstick and feel the whole movement through, adding some fractionals to feel the whole movement through with a little bit of load, and also giving them that load from that bottom up position allows their brain to start developing that wire, that neural connection for that movement. I won't go through these bits here, but just to summarize, or the conclusion of this article written by Greg, again, back in 2005, so such a long time ago. With practice, you'll be able to bring your hands closer together and still keep the bar in the frontal plane. And ultimately, you can develop enough control and flexibility to descend to a rock bottom squat with your feet together and hands together, with the dowel, without the dowel coming forward. Practicing for this is a superb warm-up and cool-down drill and stretch. So another hands together, locked out overhead, and feet together would be the ultimate test of your own body's ability to hold posture, its own mobility, and your stability in that movement, if you can bring that all as close as possible. So again, if you're chasing virtuosity in movement, maybe you're really good at overhead squats with your normal grip and normal squat stance. If you want to make them more challenging or make what you're doing even easier, you can progress to that more challenging or more perfect version of an overhead squat, where hands narrower because it makes it harder for you, feet narrower because it makes it harder for you, and progress through that. And that will increase your overhead squat mobility. It will increase your core strength, your shoulder stability and mobility there too, and just in general have flow-on effects for your balance and coordination across many other movements too. The overhead squat develops core control by punishing any forward wobble of the load with an enormous and instant increase in the movement about the hip and back. When the bar is held perfectly overhead and still, which is nearly impossible, the overhead squat does not present greater load on the hip or back, but moving too fast, along the wrong line of action, or wiggling can bring even the lightest loads down like a house of cards. You have two and only two safe options for bailing out: dumping the load forward and stepping or falling backward, or dumping the load backward and stepping or falling forward. Both are safe and easy. Lateral escapes are not an option. So again, you have to be able to get that bar back behind your head to be able to safely dump it and lean forward. The forward motion obviously is a little easier to get out of the road because it's already out in front of you. But in particular, that hand grip or that width that you have on that broomstick or barbell will dictate that whether you can safely dump behind you. The difference between your overhead squat and your back or front squat is a solid measure of your midline stability and control, and the precision of your squatting posture and line of action. So can I bring this back on here? Improving and developing your overhead squat will fix faults not visible in the back and front squats. So again, it's that whole thing of like training virtuosity in a movement has those flow-on effects to all of the other movements you do without you even realizing. As your max overhead, back, and front squat each rise, their relative measure reveals much about your developing potential for athletic movement. An average of your max back and front squat is an excellent measure of your core, hip, and leg strength. Your max overhead squat is an excellent measure of your core stability and control, and ultimately your ability to generate effective and efficient athletic power. Your max overhead squat will always be a fraction of the average of your max back and front squat, but ideally with time, they should converge rather than diverge. Should they diverge, you are developing hip and core strength, but your capacity to efficiently apply power distally is reduced. In athletic pursuits, you may be prone to injury. Should they converge, you are developing useful strength and power that can be successfully applied to athletic movements. The functional application of utility of the overhead squat may not be readily apparent, but there are many real-world occurrences where objects high enough to get under are too heavy or not free enough to be jerked or pressed overhead, yet can be elevated by first lowering your hips until your arms can be locked out and then squatting upward. Once developed, the overhead squat is a thing of beauty, a masterpiece of expression in control, stability, balance, efficient power, and utility. Get on it. So let's see. I wonder if the overhead squats will be in the open, particularly after just throwing me for a loop yesterday with the judges course. But without that, I wouldn't have read the journal article. I wouldn't have gone back through the training guide. I wouldn't have looked at old scorecards, and I would have wondered, when did CrossFit change that as a movement standard, and how come they didn't tell us? Well, it turns out they never changed it as a movement standard. They just got more specific about how they described it. I hope you learned something here today. Like I said, throw in the comments or the chat, how long can you hold a bottom squat for? So just no weight included at all. Just an air squat, bottom hold position. What's your total duration? How long can you hold that position for? Can you hold a bottom squat while doing a broomstick pass through? Try them out. Let me know how you go. Let me know how long you can, or whether you can or can't do the pass through. Be interested to see. If you were here listening, I thank you for taking your time, spending another chunk of your day listening to me talk to you. And I'll call it there.